Hey everyone, welcome to Let's Talk Bitcoin Live. This is a special edition of LTB. We're going to be talking about Ethereum, Ethereum Classic, the hard fork, consensus, and immutability. Your three hosts for today, myself, Andreas, Antonopoulos. We have Stephanie Murphy.
Hello.
And slightly delayed because of technical difficulties, we will soon have Adam Levine joining us in just a few minutes. Later on in the show, we have three esteemed guests from the Ethereum community who will be able to give us different perspectives. Martin Köppelmann, Anthony Iorio, and Charles Hoskinson will be joining us in about 25 minutes, and we're going to have a lively debate and discussion about Ethereum versus Ethereum Classic. So, Stephanie, have you been watching all of this drama in Ethereum? What are your thoughts?
Well, I've had some personal stuff going on, and I have enough drama in my life, so I haven't been following it very closely. But it's kind of hard to ignore. It's also hard to completely keep up with because there's just so much happening. But from my basic understanding, there was a hard fork of the Ethereum blockchain. Now there's Ethereum Classic, which is the original Ethereum, and ETH, which is the forked version. And there's these now two chains that are kind of competing against each other. And the reason for the hard fork was to kind of undo the damage from the DAO failure that we've talked about a couple of times on the show so far. How close am I, Andreas? Do you want to give a bird's eye view?
Yeah, that's exactly what has happened. So the international symbol for fork is this one.
Also, on Vulcan, it means something different.
Yes. This means that both forks live long and prosper. And so what we saw was on July 20th, in the morning, I believe, of July 20th, Ethereum executed a hard fork. This had been planned for maybe 3 weeks in advance. After a previous attempt to do a soft fork, a hard fork was executed. And the hard fork, basically what it did is it reconfigured the majority of Ethereum clients, nodes, and miners to sweep the balance of all contracts that were related to the DAO, the parent DAO, all of the children DAOs, the extra balance, and the attacker DAO, or multiple DAOs that had been compromised by the attacker. All of that, the white hat DAO that had tried to siphon from the attacker's DAO, but then had its own funds siphoned from the white hat DAO, all of that got swept into a new contract, which I call the refund DAO. And the refund DAO, very, very simple contract. Its only purpose is to refund the DAO tokens. Full disclosure, I had $40 or 400 DAO tokens approximate value in the DAO so that I could participate. And I executed a refund on the refund DAO on the post-hard fork chain and got my 4 Ether back. So this all happened July 20th. And now the expectation was that since the vast majority, more than 90% of the hashing power was committed to going forward with a hard fork and refunding the DAO, that chain would dominate. That didn't quite play out. Within a couple of days, it became evident that some miners were holdouts. They were continuing to mine the old chain, quite deliberately so, and we saw something very interesting. The hash rate on the old chain started rising as more miners committed hashing power to the old chain, or the traditional chain, or Classic as it became known. And I think 3 days into it, one of the exchanges decided, after seeing a lot of activity and a secondary market, mostly over-the-counter trading of this Ethereum Classic, decided to list it. And Ethereum Classic was listed on Poloniex, I believe, on July 23rd. Several other exchanges joined in, and more hashing power got added. As of yesterday, Ethereum Classic, or ETC, had about a third, 28.5% of the hashing power of Ethereum post-hard fork, Ethereum HF or ETH, and about 30% of the value. So the value tracked really close to the actual hash rate. And there was furious activity. In fact, at some point yesterday, we saw a huge rise of Classic, a big drop in Ethereum, and the volume of trading in both chains was very, very high, unusually high. Never seen anything like it in Ethereum. And at some point, Ethereum Classic's trading volume was higher than the Ethereum chain's volume. So that's what happened yesterday. And today, we saw a bit of a reversal. I can look at the statistics now, but we saw, let's see, we saw Ethereum Classic drop a bit today, and Ethereum rise. So as of now, in the last 24 hours, Classic is now down 22%, and Ethereum is up 13%. So that trend has reversed. And here we are.
So that's interesting. It appears they're kind of duking it out against each other, these two competing chains. But meanwhile, there's a lot of companies, like I know Anthony with the Jax wallet, for example, that have to decide what to do about this with their software that uses Ethereum or with their apps for Ethereum.
Well, not necessarily. Well, yes. In some cases, yes.
Mm-hmm. Well, also exchanges, too, that have to decide what, like, for instance, Coinbase just added Ethereum, I guess, right, just recently. And they, every exchange that trades Ethereum has to make a decision about this, too. So I can imagine it's confusing not just for the users, but also for businesses that are trying to come to a decision about what to do about this.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk a bit about what it means to have two forks, two different chains that have a common ancestor. So up to a specific block, the two chains are identical, right? The fork happened on July 20th. Every transaction, every block, everything before July 20th is identical. The two systems diverge on July 20th, and what's the primary difference? In fact, the one way to test and know which chain you're on, and you can even write a contract that can determine which chain it's on, is to check the DAO contract. If the DAO contract still has a balance, you're on the old chain. If the DAO contract has no balance, or the refund DAO has a balance, then you're on the new chain. And so you can actually write a contract that can execute only on one chain or only on the other chain. But for the most part, most contracts are on both chains. They execute on both chains. Everyone who had coins that were on the original Ethereum chain up to July 20th, in the evening of July 20th, had coins on both chains. And this is where things get a bit complicated. So did you actually have any Ether at all, Stephanie?
No, I have 0 Ether. I never had any DAO tokens. I've not gotten involved at all.
Okay,
so
very
I've
good.
just been watching this from the outside. Yeah, I like your full disclosure there. And I'm glad you got that $40 back of
Of DAO.
Yeah, 4 Ether.
And I also, to further the disclosure, I also sold my Ether and my Ether Classic after the fork. And I don't actually hold any Ether or Classic at the moment.
Okay.
Risk averse here. I do not like 30+% per day volatility. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think for you, correct me if I'm wrong, but the reason you got interested in it in the first place was to, to play with it and to try writing contracts and to try using Ethereum. So
That's correct.
You were not like doing it as an investment, but
no, but I did write my own split contract and tried to execute that with mixed success. It didn't work the first couple of times I tried it. So I had the experience of trying to write a contract that understands which chain it's on and splits appropriately.
What is a split contract?
So here's the thing, then, and this is where things get really complicated. If you have Ethereum before July 20th, then after July 20th, you have Ethereum and you have Classic, and it's in the same address, effectively. It's the balance corresponds to the same address or the same contract address. Now, if you then try to move it, right? Let's say you run a client and you're running a client on the new Ethereum chain, and you make a transaction to send your Ether from one address A to address B. Now, if you're running this on the new chain, you would expect that your Ether on the new chain would move to address B, and your Ethereum Classic on the old chain would remain in address A. But that's not exactly what happens. A lot of clients, whether deliberately or inadvertently, are basically relaying transactions, and because the transactions look identical, whether you're on the old chain or the new chain, you have what's known as a replay. So if you make a transaction to move Ethereum from A to B on the new chain, and that transaction is replayed, then guess what? Your Ethereum Classic moves from address A to address B on the old chain too. So it seems like it becomes quite difficult to isolate the effects from the two chains.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I'm so confused. But you explained it fine, Andreas. It's just it takes some work to understand how this all goes down. And yeah, I mean, I've seen a lot of people posting online that they were really confused. Like, if they're getting a refund, are they getting refund of are they getting a refund of ETH or ETC, or they didn't know what was going on?
Well, if you're getting a refund, you're using the refund DAO, and that only exists on the new chain because it's the result of the hard fork sweeping all of the Ether. In the Classic chain, the DAO attacker has the 50-some million dollars worth of Classic Ether, and they get to keep it. In the new chain, the money got swept into the refund DAO, and DAO token holders are able to withdraw and get a refund on their DAO, and so they get a refund in ETH. That ETH does not exist on the old chain also as ETC, because in the old chain, the attacker has it. So yes, it's a bit confusing. But if you just had normal Ether on the chain before July 20th, after July 20th you have the same amount. Say you had 10 Ether before, now you have 10 Ether on the new chain and 10 Classic on the old chain. But the problem is, if you try to do transactions on either chain, those transactions usually get replayed. So what happens on one chain gets mirrored on the other. And this is where a split contract comes in. So with a split contract, what you do is you create a break so that you force your Ether to move to a different address than your Classic, so that you can control the two independently without having this replay effect. So you essentially split the control. And the way you do that is a contract that knows which chain it's on and does a different thing if it's on the Classic chain and a different thing if it's on the new chain. And by splitting that effect on one transaction, from that moment on, those coins on the old and new chain follow different paths and have a different future. So that allows you then to exert control over one chain or another without having a replay risk.
Okay. Well, we have our three guests here.
How about we bring them in?
Yeah, let's bring them in.
All right, fantastic. Let me bring in first Mr. Martin Köppelmann here. Let's see. Martin, you're with us. If you unmute. Hey.
Can you hear me?
Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us. Our next guest, Mr. Anthony Iorio. Anthony, you are live and in the show.
I'm unmuted now. Hey
there
guys, glad to be here.
Welcome, Anthony. Good to see you again. And last but not least, Mr. Charles Hoskinson.
Hi, guys. Great to hear from you.
Charles, thank you so much for joining us. I understand it's quite late where you are. Thanks for taking the time to do this at 2 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, I'm right now in Osaka, Japan. So let's try to get it wrapped up by like 4 a.m. or something like that.
We'll try. We'll definitely try.
Wow, that's dedication.
Well, I got a life-size Mario here with me, so we should be okay.
Oh yeah, very good.
Yeah, everything's okay when you got Mario.
So,
all right, so should we say? Yeah, go ahead.
No, you go ahead, Stephanie.
Should we say, so we meant to sort of structure this as a debate, a friendly debate, but just people with different points of view about Ethereum Classic versus ETH versus the two kind of coexisting together. And we have one person that's representing sort of each viewpoint. And yeah, and Andreas is going to be the moderator asking questions, and then we'll sort of give everybody a chance to respond. Is that right?
Yeah, I think that's a good approach. Why don't we start with Martin? And Martin, if I understand it correctly, you are supporting the hard fork and the evolution of Ethereum into the new chain where the DAO got refunded.
Yes.
Very good. And you see that as the way forward. Can you tell us a bit about your perspective?
Yeah. So my perspective is there are two big questions that we might discuss today. So the one question is, was the fork the right decision? And the other question is, now given that there is a fork, should we have one community or should we divide the community? And yeah, my opinion is, so on the fork decision, I have been pro the fork, but I'm not kind of super extreme pro the fork. I mean, I see the arguments for both sides. I can totally make the argument for the fork. I think it was just a pragmatical thing to do, just a way to move forward, to concentrate again on actually building stuff instead of having years, maybe spending years with this attack and an attacker owning 15% of all Ether. So that's topic one. And topic two, in my opinion, is now that we have the fork, should we have two communities or one? And I see at this point huge benefits of having one community. So Ethereum is about network effects. It's about having all those dApps that nicely work together because they are on the same singleton, they are on the same world computer, the Ethereum network. And currently we only have those network effects if they are on the same chain. Maybe in 4 or 5 years we can have kind of dApps that work cross chains, but I think at this point it's way better to concentrate on one chain.
Very good. So that's the pro-Ethereum, pro-single community perspective. I'll go to the other extreme first. Charles, it seems that you are the guest who believes that classic Ethereum as it was, pro-immutability, if you like, is your position. Is that correct?
Well, I'm kind of in an interesting position because I was one of the founders of the Ethereum project, and what initially attracted me to Ethereum was the social contract of having this world computer where the code is basically law. It runs as written. And a lot of people were really excited about that kind of a prospect. If you look at Ethereum as a system, it's a terribly inefficient computer. It's a very expensive computer, and it's probably the most expensive ever built relative to its peers. And there's certainly better models to do distributed computing with. So the saving grace of the system has always been that you can write code that, regardless of who it's inconvenient to or the consequences of that code, you have a safe place where you're able to run that code without fear of censorship. So that was the initial social contract. That's what I signed up for. Obviously, I left the Ethereum community about June of 2014, and I went on to do other things. But when the fork occurred, it really got me angry, and it got a lot of other people in the community very angry. And the people who created Ethereum Classic, I think what they were first trying to do was at least a protest, saying that you can't quite do this to the community. You can't quite just change the social contract and say this is pragmatism. This has never been done in Bitcoin. you have to accept that not everybody's going to go along with your vision, and you're now effectively walking away from a meaningful percentage of your community. So that's, I think, from my view, from the time I've spent in the Ethereum Classic community, the viewpoint that most of them enjoy, but not all of them. Actually, there's a lot of new people entering the space, especially from the Bitcoin world, who are attracted to this like fanatical loyalty to immutability.
Charles, let me ask you, just before the hard fork was executed, there were some attempts to gauge the interest of the community. Now, I will say that in my eyes, those attempts were not very robust. The voting that did happen was in a few selected forms where not everybody had access, not everybody knew how to vote, and there wasn't really enough time. A lot of this happened under enormous pressure. Do you think that these votes, or the sentiment that was shown on places like Reddit and Carbon Vote, I think it was called,
right.
Do you think those represented the mix of opinions? Because at the time it was looking somewhere between 80-20 and 90-10 pro-fork. Do you think that was misrepresentative?
Well, it's hard to say. I mean, you have empirical data based upon the hash rate participation and the market value of Ethereum Classic that there's certainly a community that did not accept it. The second thing is that, you know, a vacuous vote where there's no value or risk behind the vote is not, in my view, as strong as doing something like an assurance contract that's a proof of burn to a new chain, for example. You know, there were other options to try to gauge community support and participation than just a single vote. And you know, the other thing is that I think the debate has been misconstrued a bit. On the Ethereum side, a lot of people say, oh, it's anti-fork versus pro-fork, and everybody in the Ethereum Classic community is against forks in all cases. I think it's more of what was the social contract of Ethereum, and if you want to change that social contract, what is the proper course of action to do that? I think a single vote where there's no stake behind it and no cost behind that vote is probably not the best way of doing it. You need to do something a bit more extreme, like advocate some sort of threshold proof of burn smart contract or something like that. Because at the very least, then you guarantee 100% of the people in the new chain agree with exactly what you said, and they've actually put money on the line, value on the line, as opposed to just saying, hey, let's just do an opinion poll and see where people sit, and then just push through a change which may or may not be representative of the will of the community.
I think everyone in the Ethereum community agrees that we need better tools for governance. I mean, it was just there was time pressure, so we tried within weeks everything that was possible, and it was not only vote, as it was not only this carbon vote. There was a different voting mechanism. There was voting mechanism for miners. There have been forum discussions. Totally not saying that's perfect, but that was just as good as we got it there.
Well, so Martin, the end result of that right now is that if you look at the miner vote, and you look at that 10 days after the fork, the actual result was, at some point yesterday, was closer to 70-30 in terms of the hashing rate. But before we go into a back and forth debate on that issue, I would like to bring in Anthony. Anthony, you said you were comfortable with both chains coexisting, and you see a possibility of having this kind of multi-coin, multi-Ethereum world. You're muted, we can't hear you. Or your microphone stopped working.
You might want to switch.
There we go. No?
Anthony?
No, we can't hear you. Unfortunately, your microphone isn't working. Fantastic. This is live show. You're now muted. Now you're unmuted, still not working. Maybe you should unplug and replug your microphone. We'll try and bring Adam back in. He's now online again. This is fantastic.
Live radio, folks, or video.
Live video, radio, TV. Nope, Anthony, I think you may have to shut down and restart your Hangouts session. Sorry about that. We do not seem to have audio with you. Hey, at least we're creating our own conversation and having a meaningful discussion here. Live TV nowadays consists of Anderson Cooper reading things from Twitter. So we're doing a bit better than that. Yeah, so governance is a big part of this, right? There is really no perfect way to get everybody's opinion to count. Is that what you were saying, Martin, just before I interrupted you?
No, I mean, yeah, I just think I agree here with Charles that that we could have better tools, and we will have better tools soon. So tools like where you could actually put something at stake. Prediction markets. I mean, I'm building prediction markets in 3 years. I think they can be a great tool for governance. Yeah, but again, there was big time pressure, and I think overall there was a wide variety of votes and getting sentiments of the community, and I think so 80–90% of the existing community agreed to do the fork, and the other ones were against it. But I think even most of them are now still joining ETH. So from the existing developer community and from the existing projects, way more than 90% have clearly stated that they will stick to ETH.
Yes, but that doesn't cost anything to make that statement on Reddit. But if you look at people who are putting their money behind their mouth, whether it's by committing mining equipment or by buying the currency, ETC, it's more like a 70-30. So you know, which is more representative of stake in this particular case as to the decision? The answer I heard from the community is it's all evil Bitcoin maximalists trying to destroy your party.
No, I would not see it that way. So I mean, first, you indeed need like only spend a few $million to to get the price at the level where it is. And I would say regarding the hash rate will follow the price. So if the price is 30% of ETH, miners are just economical, so they will. So the difficulty will also go up to 30%. So yes, you can kind of influence the miners with buying ETC, clearly. However, I'm not looking at short-term price swings. I'm in for the long game and for building stuff, and that will happen on ETH, so, as far as I can see.
Well, I think a bit premature to say, oh, well, ETH is always going to be the dominant platform for people to build things. You know, the other issue is that you have made Ethereum effectively toxic in the long term for miners. You guys are going to proof of stake. There is no place for miners to live long term in that ecosystem. And from my conversations with the people in Ethereum Classic, especially some of the mining pools that are starting to make commitments to exclusively mine ETC, they like the prospect of leaving Ethereum on a proof of work based system or something along those lines. So I think it's too early to tell when one chain is just a few weeks old, effectively, where the developer community is going to move. The other thing that hasn't been mentioned here that should be is rootstock. Rootstock is coming. There's a lot of momentum. The Bitcoin space is very excited about it. And there's probably going to be some effort to start talking about cross-deployment, much like we do with PhoneGap. You use PhoneGap to deploy on multiple ecosystems. So I think a lot of people are going to start building tools to actually deploy on rootstock as well as Ethereum. It would make no sense to just omit Ethereum Classic, especially if these systems are fairly similar to each other, as they are right now. So I think it's, number one, way too early to tell where the developer community is going to be long-term, especially considering how small it is. Number two, if Ethereum Classic chooses a mining-centric roadmap, there's a built-in constituency there that won't go away. And number three, there still is an open philosophical question if Ethereum Classic is going to stay the same as Ethereum or if it's going to diverge. And there's a lot of, right now, internal debate in the Ethereum Classic Slack about what the roadmap needs to look like.
That's a really good point, and I'd like to jump in briefly here and ask a follow-up question. We still have some minor technical problems with Anthony. I'm trying to bring him into the discussion as soon as possible. And Adam has rejoined us. Hi, Adam.
Hey, everybody.
Adam.
Hello.
Hey, so Charles, I actually had a quick question for you. So we've seen Ethereum forked before. This is not the first fork of Ethereum to come out. There's one that comes to mind prominently called EXP. I think it's called Expanse. And
Right.
they also were an ideological fork at the very beginning when Ethereum announced that they were going to do a pre-mine as part of the funding for the launch of the chain and the technology. So what's different about ETC compared to EXP that makes this chain viable while the earlier one wasn't?
Well, that's a very good question. I mean, if I had to gamble and take a guess, because it's all speculation, right? I think the speculation would be that people put money behind a social contract. And when the Ether sale was done, there was an enormous amount of advertising about a paradigm of what Ethereum was. Now, some people obviously participated in that crowd sale from perhaps a speculation standpoint, but most people, I'd like to believe, at least had some ideological alignment with the crowd sale. And so, as a consequence, I'd say that some subset of the people living in the Ethereum ecosystem really do take this code as law paradigm very seriously. Furthermore, there's 2 years of training wheels that have been put there. Gavin Wood was going around talking about illegality and inventing new words on the fly. There was a lot of meetup groups that this was really the core ideology that they were pushing through. So when you start tinkering with these things, it doesn't sit well with a lot of people. Whereas things like the pre-mine, that's kind of a different notion. If you didn't like that social contract, you wouldn't have put money into Ethereum or supported it to begin with. So maybe a fork could happen, maybe not. It's hard to say, but that's my kind of armchair initial speculative guess about why this is more successful than other attempts. But I could be wrong.
Hang on, Adam.
I heard now.
Hang on. Yes, let's bring Anthony in. I think it's working. Anthony, third time lucky.
All right, it's working now. Thanks, Andreas.
Mm-hmm.
I think disclosures need to be done first. Ethereum founder as well. Hold Ether. Of course, I haven't split yet, so I still hold the Classic. Large DAO holder as well. And if we talk about the fork first, for me, it was, this is not a do-over. We don't get a second chance on this. Wasn't beta. This wasn't a test. This was live. Now, perhaps it shouldn't have been. Perhaps it should have been tested. Perhaps there should have been a lot more done prior. I took a gamble in it. It wasn't a substantial, like it was a large amount, but it wasn't a large percentage of my Ether holdings. This is a great experiment. I thought it was premature to actually put it in the way that it was done, but I think that we needed this experiment, and that's what it was. And when it didn't go the way that people thought it would, and I think that I said, well, okay, well, I guess I'm losing out on that thing that I was planning on doing. I'm losing out on that investment, and hopefully things get learned and we move on. That was my position. Of course, when it actually was, consensus seemed to say, let's do it. I'm also a business person, and we have to think, well, am I going to take this hard stance? And no, I've always been about softer stances. It's not about pure decentralization for me or about pure leadership. It's a mixture of both, and it's going to take time, and things need to be done in stages. We can't go too extreme on the things, and that's what I think the DAO did. But I never would say I'm a pure decentralist, even though my brand is called Decentral. It's about taking baby steps, about doing things slowly. It's about using both sides to come together and learn from both. And I think with the chain, having two different groups and two different communities, my call is just to stop the polarization and just see if there are benefits of having two chains here. Is there benefits for us that we can learn? Could one be more sandbox? Like there's got to be benefits. And as a business owner, I have to also look at both sides. And it's not about, people say you have to pick one side or the other, and I just don't believe that. I really don't. I think that if I had to say one thing, immutability to me is something that's very dear to me. Consensus, democracy is something that needs to be worked on. To me, immutability should be at the forefront. But I see both sides, and I think we got to listen to both sides, and we have to see for us and for the building up products. I want simplicity. It's very difficult to be introducing this stuff to the masses, which is where we want to take this, when every day it's getting more and more complex. And as a wallet operator, I have to say, well, do we institute ETC? Will our other guys be mad? Do we have to now have a split contract and give people choices and redevelop our whole way and look and feel to do this like we did with the DAO? We were getting very, very into the DAO. We were starting to develop voting mechanisms inside of JAX to do this, and we learned from that because I think we jumped the gun. Now with the ETC, it's let's see how this plays out, but I'm not going to be forced into a one side or the other, and I have to make a choice. We're going to do what our customers want. We're going to do it hopefully in a way where we're learning for both sides, and I think the toxic terms that get used all the time need to be changed. That this was words like theft, and if this was a theft, you're siding with thieves, and it doesn't help. And I think there needs to just be a lot more understanding. We're so new in this, that collaboration, cooperation, getting our main ideas, which is we're all into this technology. It's experimental. We need to grow it, and how do we most efficiently grow it and get rid of this sideshow that I've been seeing, and just push this idea forward so that we all have choice and we all have freedom using this technology and the ability to make the choices that we want without having to take either side.
Yeah, one of the risks that I've discovered, Anthony, is if you have a nuanced position, people accuse you of sitting on the fence and they throw rockets at you from both sides of the fence.
Yeah.
But you get comfortable with that position, right? There are simple answers to complex problems, and those answers are wrong. And there are self-righteous and unnuanced positions you can take. This is X, this is how it is, there is no other way. And those positions are usually wrong or short-sighted. I'm certainly comfortable with nuance, especially in an early stage situation like this. But here's a question. You talked about complexity. Having two chains running in parallel, that certainly creates a lot of complexity, especially of the user interface with the idea of splitting and replay. One of the comments I made is that not putting in replay defenses was a mistake. It created even more uncertainty than necessary, and not putting in some mechanism to clearly be able to identify which singleton you're running on. A constant contract that exists only on one chain and doesn't exist on the other. That would have made a huge difference. So where do we go from here? Martin's position is that it's better to just have one and to converge the network effect on that one. Martin, that's your position, but practically speaking, you can't force anyone to abandon ETC, and it doesn't look likely that it is going to be abandoned.
Yeah. So you're right about the replay attacks. I think that even now people are from either side are saying, well, we're not going to do something to fix it, the other guy should be doing it. Well, we're not going to do something, the other guy should be fixing that. I think that's a pretty horrible statement as well. Where do we go from here? We're gonna see who wins out. The companies yesterday, many of the DApp companies in the space, and Ethereum came out and said we're supporting ETH 100%. We're supporting ETH 100%. I guess we'll be able to see now, even from that what power do they have, and are people in this for those apps that are coming out, or are people into this for the mining and the price? And that's going to be an interesting test that's going to emerge, I think, as well. Is what's the power of that going to be? We saw the price increase because of that. Could that be a short-term thing? I don't know. I think for me, I'm going to make decisions, and speaking from a business owner who's a blockchain company. I'm not an Ethereum company. I'm not a Bitcoin company. We're supporting Bitcoin. I'm supporting Ethereum. We've got Dash coming in next week. I'm going to support them all. I'm going to support them all and let people make their choices, and that's what I'd like the people to do. And if one keeps going strong, the other whittles away, okay, that's fine. We're going to support what our customers want. We're going to do it in a way that explains things very clearly as to why we're taking certain positions that we're going to take, and that's just going to have to be what's accepted. And if we lose customers with that, so be it. If we gain customers, that's fine. I think we need to be open and as transparent as possible and set our values and set where we're thinking and where we're going, and that's the best that we can do as a business, and that's what we're going to do.
It seems to me, and I'm going to direct this question to Charles, and from your perspective, it seems to me that coins don't die. The history of all of the cryptocurrencies we've seen, 700, 800, 1,000 plus have launched. The only cryptocurrencies that have actually died are the ones where the chain stopped working, and usually that was because of either a difficulty bomb or a 51% attack that crashed the difficulty retargeting or some other problem like that that caused the chain to stop, to grind to a halt. But as long as the chain is going, that currency has value. Maybe it's just a few pennies, but it still has value. So some people have suggested that the only way to fix this is to attack ETC. I think that's a terrible idea, but what do you have to say about that?
The old chains never die; they just fork away.
Yes.
That should be a T-shirt.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think there was some initial conversation about doing it, like a 51% attack or DDoSing certain people, and there may have been some of that with Bitcoin Classic, if I recall properly. But you know, the reality is that it's just talk until someone does it, and then we kind of evoke the old evolutionary Darwinism of cryptocurrencies, where we see what defenses they actually have within their community. And what's really amazing to me is how resilient some of these systems tend to be. I mean, if we look at the history of Bitcoin, Bitcoin itself has gone through some really terrible times. There was a particular flaw that had to be fixed, which allowed billions of Bitcoins to be created. There were some forks that occurred along the way, and you know, there's certainly a lot of security problems that Circular Learner and others discovered, where they very quietly fixed them, you know, as some like bug fix. So I think that if somebody wants to attack ETC, they're just going to do it. If the DAO hacker wants to liquidate all his or her coins, they're going to do it. Just like if Satoshi wants to liquidate his coins, he's going to do it. And we just move on. And the strength of the ecosystem is the strength of the community. So if they're unified behind an ideology and they're unified behind a vision and a roadmap and they believe really firmly in it, they'll walk through broken glass to get it done, as the Bitcoin community has done over the last few years. So that's really, I think, the great first challenge of ETC is that it's not going to, in my view, be killed from the outside. It's either going to survive or be killed based upon whether the community in ETC unifies behind something. Right now it's fragmented, and it's only unified behind anger over this fork. They felt like they weren't consented, and they're just really pissed off. And it doesn't help when Mihai says Ethereum troll cave or something like that. And it doesn't help when Vitalik posts things like, well, even if ETC wins, I'm never going to work on it. These are divisive statements, and I've made some myself.
Yeah, speaking about that, and I'm going to switch to you, Martin, the point you made also is the network effect really relates more to the community and the developers and the applications that are built than anything else. What we saw was a few months ago, a lot of people in Ethereum were saying, we have no governance problems, we have no scale problems, come here, Bitcoiners, escape from the vitriol and nastiness of the RBTC, RBitcoin split. Last week, we saw for the first time moderators within the Ethereum Reddit censoring posts about doing a 51% attack on Classic, saying those kinds of attacks should not be promoted within Ethereum. At the same time, we've seen a split, and there is a whole Ethereum Classic Reddit, and the community is now pretty much in the same position. Fortunately, not yet as much vitriol as a protracted 2-year battle over block size has created in Bitcoin. Are you worried about censorship, community forking, attacks, personal attacks, vitriol, and these things emerging in the Ethereum community?
Little bit, of course. But regarding to those statements of Vitalik, for example, sticking clearly to ETH, I think it's just a rational thing to do. So essentially, cryptocurrencies are coordination games. So if you get enough people to coordinate on something, if you build a big enough community, then it has value. Otherwise, it has not. So it's not, I mean, of course, technology is a big point of it, but community is even bigger. So otherwise, all those Bitcoin clones were just as good as Bitcoin. Of course, they are not, because they don't have the community. So, and that's what happened in the last in the last days that the existing ETH community is reassuring each other that they stick together as a community and that they go forward as a community, and so that was the reason why yesterday all over Reddit you saw this. We stick to ETH, and I think again at this point it makes a lot of sense.
Martin, we saw that all over the Ethereum Reddit. We did not see that all over the Ethereum Classic Reddit.
Right, because there just aren't too much developers that do it for Classic. That's how simple it is.
And Martin, if in 2012, before seeing the white paper, everything was Bitcoin for me, Bitcoin, and that Ethereum opened the eyes for me to so much more beyond that. For me to have made a statement or something about Bitcoin at that time, saying I'm all Bitcoin, I'm only working on Bitcoin, would never have opened my eyes or my doors to new things emerging. And that's maybe what some of these divisive positions actually might lead to in the future, where there's just it closes off things to make that just a statement like that. I think you can say yes, that's against ETC if that's what they're referencing, but are they referencing other technologies too? I'm very excited, as you mentioned, about rootstock. I'm excited about other things coming out. To me, it doesn't seem like a common sense move for me to make a statement like that. There will be nothing else, and that's all. I will only do this.
Okay, I think that's not what most did, but I think there needs to be a balance between diversity and bundling things together. So if you have too much diversities and none of the projects get a certain scale, that if you have no diversity, that also bad. And I would say currently ETC and ETH are too close together to justify the split of the community. If Charles, you just mentioned, if for example ETC would decide to stick to proof of work or kind of differentiate itself bigger from Ethereum, then I would welcome that actually. But currently at this point, when you have two almost the same thing, then I would say better stick to one.
Well, but with all due respect, how can we work together when one side is saying things like pump and dump, troll cave? These guys are just supporters of.
It's going both ways though, though.
I understand it goes both ways, but I mean, somebody has to be the bigger man, and I think there's tangible value to having people come together and say, listen, they're probably not going to go away. There's around a $200 million market cap. There's a sizable mining support base, and with all due respect to developers, they're coming. I'm hiring 3 full-time developers myself. And I have many cryptographers and good developers working for me. Take a look at our GitHub repo. Look at Scorex. Look at our RSCoin implementation in Haskell. We will have developers within our space very soon. We already have a lot of volunteer developers within our Slack. There's 500 people in the Slack, and it's grown like wildfire. And a lot of people who are entering Ethereum Classic are coming actually from the Bitcoin space or from other altcoins.
Oh, that's great. So if you build a new community coming from people coming from the Bitcoin space, awesome. But I think those who stick to Ethereum, I think most will, those who were building stuff on Ethereum, most will continue to build stuff on Ethereum.
Both sides should be trying to take a better stand and say, when you're hearing those things that are the garbage, are the noise. Doing here right now, it's a position Ethereum always used to take. When we were dealing with others, when we started surging, we would start getting these call-outs, and we would never respond to anything like that. We would always, in the communities, the Reddits, it would always be very civil. This is until recently very civil. We're not like that. We're not going to do that. So if both sides can start pushing aside when that stuff happens, that toxic stuff, if you could each say, as a leader in your sides, we don't accept that. We don't agree with that. We have our differences of opinions, but that's not what we're about. That's not the community that we want to have ETC or ETH start looking like. And I think that's what I find very, very disturbing is I'm seeing that change that's happening. And that was never the case with Ethereum, in my opinion.
Well, I mean, that's because you didn't have $250 million at stake or more. And when you have stake, you have contention, and when you have contention, out comes the vitriol and the trolls. That's almost
And
inevitable.
leaders let them like, get a certain stance that we're just not gonna put up.
I think
with
that's a great idea, and it's admirable from my experience. Even though I've had many people in the Bitcoin space during the scaling debates from both sides of the aisle call for civility, call for a reduction in personal attacks and vitriol and all of that. The end result is the trolls don't really go away. Part of that is just a matter of growing up, and you will have a certain percentage of that. I've got a follow-up question for all three of you. Not many people know this, especially outside of the Ethereum developer space. Ethereum has a difficulty bomb, and that difficulty bomb was set in place in order to push the system into proof of stake within a year or so. So let me first explain what that is for our audience, and then let me get questions, because this has some very important implications for the road forward. So in Bitcoin, the difficulty is retargeted every 2 weeks so that one value stays constant, and that is the block issuance time of 10 minutes. Ethereum doesn't quite do that. There's a 15-second block issuance timing, but over time, the difficulty inflates on purpose so as to make it less and less and less profitable to mine with proof of work, with the idea that about a year out, it becomes untenable to sustain proof of work. And at that point, a hard fork will be necessary, and that hard fork can go one of two ways. It can either defuse the difficulty bomb and reset the difficulty for proof of work to continue, postponing proof of stake forever or postponing it temporarily, or that hard fork will switch the system to proof of stake. Either way, within a year, both Ethereum and Ethereum Classic must do another hard fork each. So where do we end up? Ethereum Lite, Ethereum Zero, Ethereum Classic, Ethereum New. Are we going to split into 8 Ethereum?
Right.
What happens next? Martin, do you want to take the difficulty bomb on the Ethereum side?
Right. So I don't know yet. I mean, it depends on whether or not proof of stake is at that point. So the goal is clearly to switch to proof of stake. Whether or not we are ready in a year, or I think it's a little bit more than a year, that's open. I mean, I just don't know. It's likely, or it's quite likely that there will be a period of having both, having a mixture of proof of stake and proof of work. But clearly, the long-term goal is to switch to proof of stake as early as possible. And this difficulty bomb was, I mean, it's not really necessary to do the switch, but it was kind of seeing the Bitcoin world, and well, then kind of we realized it would be good to put ourselves under pressure, kind of, so to not say, well, we'll get along, so to kind of have a point where we need to do something at least, so to at least have some kind of progress.
Okay, so Charles, from your perspective, Ethereum Classic also has the difficulty bomb, of course, but it has a different problem, which is that 14% of Classic is in the hands of the, potentially, in the hands of the DAO attacker. Do you anticipate going to proof of stake? Do you anticipate forking to defuse the difficulty bomb? Is that completely up in the air? You mentioned discussion about this on the Ethereum Classic Slack.
Right. Well, I mean, there's some house cleaning that needs to be done. Like, we need to do something to resolve the replay attack. There was a lack of foresight in hard fork. So that needs to be taken care of. And then there's also the question of the difficulty bomb. You know, there is a, at IOHK side, we do have a proof of stake algorithm we're just finishing formalization of with security proofs based on the GKL15 model. So we'll be publishing that mid-August. So we could certainly advocate that, but we still need to do some peer review once it's published to see if it's viable or not. And I'm not sure where Casper's at. I get very scared of protocols, especially consensus algorithms that are designed in an ad hoc manner. So I would advocate for removal of the difficulty bomb and a transition to a hybrid algorithm that uses both proof of work and proof of stake. There's a really good one that came out of VCU just recently. It was published July 22nd, and it's based on the GKL model, which is kind of the gold standard for making these things secure. But it's a good question. And the problem is I'm not a leader in the Ethereum Classic community. I'm just a follower. I joined. I don't speak for the community. I have my own personal opinions, and we'll hire some developers to try to move us in a particular direction. But if we don't reach social consensus, it's going to be very difficult for Ethereum Classic to coalesce around a particular vision or roadmap. So that's the first great challenge, to see whether Ethereum Classic survives or not. Going back to my prior statement of, will an outside attack kill Ethereum Classic? Probably not. If it's going to die, it's going to die as a result of the difficulty bond debate, as well as some of the other house cleaning. But it's a good opportunity. Go ahead.
Every community is going to have its governance tested going forward because of this difficulty bomb. Anthony, from your perspective, working as you said as a blockchain company that's doing development in this space, whether you support Ethereum Classic or not within your Jax wallet or other platforms you're building, what does this mean for the level of complexity and the user interface and the difficulty of developing applications as the platforms may fragment even further?
So we're developing hardware that is hopefully going to be including mining. I think the POS is going to take much longer than we think. I think this may be another good case for the two chains where perhaps the ETC does negate the bomb and decide to go on the proof of work path. Perhaps Ethereum decides to go on the POS. Perhaps that's another reason to have them. I think the reason of it, and I think it was put in place for a good reason, which was again trying to negate the centralization of mining that we've seen in Bitcoin, along with other things that were done, like GPU mining, the potential for algorithmic changes, things like that. That's the reason why I think the bomb was put in place. It does question me about. I see it differently for working on the platform and doing good for the platform itself if changes potentially be made. My whole thing with the non-fork was not doing it since an app caused an issue, and that's always been my stance on that. You're not going to change things because change a protocol that has not had an issue because of a faulty app. That's my stance there. So perhaps this could be another play as to why there might be a good reason to have two chains going forward. Perhaps there's some testing, sandboxing, things that can potentially be done on one side or another that will enable benefits of both to come together and form a much stronger system down the road.
All right, I think we've covered all of the questions I had. I don't know if Stephanie has any other questions. All right, we're going to.
Nope, go ahead, Andreas.
Thank you, Stephanie. Adam, you're back. Maybe you have some questions for us. We were getting to the point of almost wrapping up. We just talked about the difficulty bomb.
Yeah, I actually do have a couple of questions. I apologize for continuing to drop out here. My technology is really failing me today. You know, if we've already asked this, then stop me. But Martin, you're building a prediction market, you know, a prediction type application, and that is in a lot of parts of the world legally contentious. So one of the things that, there's been kind of two sides to the immutability argument, and one of them has been about kind of the censoring of things that are now possible, but that might not be legally permissible in the current environment. So given that you're in support of the ETH chain, can you kind of talk to us about any concerns you have about that, or if you don't have concerns, why?
Oh, I don't have concerns. And I think that's in my opinion, one of the big misconceptions is, I mean, of course I understand the argument. You say, well, you forked once, then can you fork for things like censoring the prediction market? And you have to understand how difficult it is to fork, or how difficult. I mean, so it's not like 3 or 4 people are saying, okay, let's do it, or you could put 3 or 4 people under pressure and then they do it. You really have to convince the whole community, so, or at least 80–90%. You really have to convince 80–90% of the community that that is the right thing. So I think kind of a false negative will never happen. So there will be a lot of cases where there is clear theft and it will be not reverted, and you might think that is unfair, but what will really not happen is that there is something that should not be reverted and that will be reverted. I see no chance that 80–90% community would agree to that.
So I think that an important kind of point in this is who is considered the community, because that's kind of a contentious issue. And when I've talked to some friends who work at Consensus, the response has been, we voted on this, and everybody had their opinion heard. There was a period of time when this happened, and my response to that was, I hold a lot of Ether, not a lot of Ether, but I hold Ether, and I didn't vote. Like, I wasn't aware that there was a vote going on, so I feel like I'm pretty plugged in, and I don't feel like that was something, and so that's one side of it. And then the other side of it is that I don't think that my vote even really matters. I think that the votes that matter are the exchanges and then the mining pools. And so if you look at it from that perspective, then sure, maybe you got 80 or 90% of the people on board with that. But that also means, and this is a conversation we had on the show a couple of weeks ago, so with Bitcoin, if you wanted to undo this in the way that it's been undone, you would have to unroll all of the transactions. And so it would be very inconvenient for the entire network. And so because of that, you have the type of protection that you're talking about where you say, well, 80 or 90% of people aren't going to agree to that, and so it's not, you're never going to see something like that happen. But I would argue that in Bitcoin, a lot of that is because it would be a painful, really inconvenient experience for everybody, because everything has to be rolled back. While with Ethereum, sorry, am I wrong?
Well, so actually, I have, so there has been very active discussions to roll back the Bitfinex hack. And it would not have been so difficult. So what you need to do is you need to get within 12 or 24 hours more than 50% of the miners to agree on that, and then you kind of double spend a single transaction, the Bitfinex, and then you replay just all other transactions. So in the end, after 24 hours, you have you can for 24 hours. The network is kind of DDoSed, so no transactions are possible because you have first to replay all transactions so far. But after 24 hours, you are in a state that is exactly the same. So it's not like if someone spends money on an exchange that would all be double spent. That's not the case, and you have a state then that is exactly the same, except this Bitfinex thing.
I disagree. Sorry, Martin. I disagree with your analysis there. In order to do that, first of all, a 50% attack would not be sufficient, because if you did, say, a 55% attack, you would have to replay 144 blocks in the time it takes for the other part of the chain to do 144 blocks. So you would actually, it would take you 3 days to replay 1 day of transactions to the point where you exceeded the original chain. That is, if you were able to sustain a 55 to 60% attack for 3 days. Meanwhile, you would have to, during this time, expend 500 megawatts of electricity continuously at full cost with zero reward, because presumably all of these miners have already received the reward for that 1 day. Right. And therefore, when replaying it, they're not getting any extra reward. Now it's costing them 500 megawatts of electricity, or approximately 10% of their monthly bill. In order to do all of this, that's for the miners replaying the 55 to 60% attack. If you were able to actually get 60% of the miners to waste 10% of their monthly electricity budget, and this is why thermodynamically guaranteed proof of work is much harder to do. It's a lot of blocks.
You super easy get them to do that. I mean, it's 12.5 Bitcoin per block. So in the hack, more than 100,000 Bitcoins are stolen. So if you pay 5,000 of those Bitcoins, that's way more than you can totally cover those.
Right. Of course, if I'm the attacker, I'm going to give 20% of my Bitcoin to the other 40% of the mining hashing power as a direct reward by spending it in fees, in double spent transactions that burn enormous fees, which are a direct incentive to the other 40% of the miners or more, if I can get them through bribery. Maybe I only want to get 10 cents on the dollar for my theft. I'm willing to burn 90% of that money in fees. It's not as easy as you make it sound, Martin. It goes into a game theoretical situation where there will be more contention. And if you drag this out, because, of course, the attacker is going to be bribing the rest of the miners, it's not going to take 3 days. So you're going to DDoS the entire network for a week, maybe longer. The costs really do ramp up very quickly.
Okay, so I come back to my initial point. You actually need 80-90% of the community, or maybe 95%, and then it works. And that's how it was done in Ethereum.
Right. Yeah. And you would not get that in Bitcoin. It's a very different
Sure, that's possible. But I'm just I mean, I'm saying it's not too much a technical difference. It's maybe a community difference. But also in Bitcoin, if you get 90% of the community to agree on a HUD or on kind of reverting a transaction, you can do it.
Yes, for about a day. Of course, UTXO gets really complicated once you start spending it and touching other transactions.
Actually, it's even simpler with the UTXO model, because kind of you have this one unspent transaction output, and everything behind this transaction output is invalid. While in Ethereum, you kind of have mixing by default. So if you put in one Ether to another account, it's kind of by default mixed. So actually, the fungibility in Ethereum is higher. So from that perspective, it's more difficult in Ethereum. Well, and it was kind of just lucky that the coins were locked in the 30-day thing. So if they wouldn't have been locked, then in Ethereum, all you could do is roll back all transactions. But there was not there would have not been an option to kind of only target this transaction.
Okay, we did go on a bit of a tangent there. Adam, back to you with your question.
So so that was actually quite educational, I think. So maybe I'm wrong here. Maybe there isn't the type of specificity that I thought that you could achieve in censoring transactions with. So anyways, my primary concern is that if you don't have to roll back everything, then it's not inconvenient for the entire network, and so it's much easier to pick out the group of specific people, whether they be exchanges or they be mining pools, that you can actually pressure in order to do that. And I'm just so anyways, I guess you've.
No, Adam, we lost you again.
I think we know that he was saying was basically if it is easier to do, you may see it getting utilized more often. And I think that's the point that he's trying to make. Because it's easier.
I would say it's not easier to do. So I'm going to disagree a bit with Adam there, and maybe you can all chime in here. This, if you're a lawyer and you want to take a case to court, you want the perfect defendant, right, or the perfect plaintiff who is clearly aggrieved, where morally everybody's on your side. I mean, come on. This was a DAO attack that affected 25,000 investors. The attacker is bad person, and must be have all of their money taken from them. Morally, ethically, in terms of narrative and story, this was the perfect candidate to promote this kind of reversal. And yet, even if you were able to get approximately an 80-20 split in the initial fork, eventually it swung back, and now you have a holdout in the form of Ethereum Classic. We couldn't even do it with a perfect candidate. How could you possibly do it when you're talking about censoring a prediction market or something like that?
Yeah,
it doesn't worry me at all. It doesn't worry me at all.
And actually, I mean, on the prediction market, so usually, as soon as you'll speak longer than an hour with someone about prediction markets, and this topic of assassination markets will come up. And I feel kind of good that if there's a big agreement in the community to censor that market, then let's do it. So I think blockchain is kind of empowering people and empowering communities, and if the community wants to do something,
we can get rid of the censorship-proof part of on the Foundation website as well. Then now, if that's the way that's immutability, unstoppable apps, censorship-proof, all those things that what it was standing for, that would definitely be cutting into that if that was the approach.
We're going to have 6 wolves and 4 sheep voting on what's for dinner. I'm sorry, there are certain principles that ought to be immutable, and people do take these things very seriously. As the debate between you and Andreas exposed, it's really, really expensive and hard to try to do even simple rollbacks with Bitcoin.
And that's good.
This is one of the reasons why Bitcoin is so incredibly valuable and why the community is so strong and has been able to endure so much pain and conflict. And I'd argue that a large chunk of the value of these systems come from either explicitly stated or unspoken social contract that they advocate. So if you say, let's build a community that's censorship resistant and it is neutral to the code that's written, you have to stick by that. You have to advocate that. And if you come in and say, well, sometimes we can censor, sometimes we can reverse things, sometimes we can give people their money back,
it's an extreme simple rule. If the very big majority of the community agrees to something, to change something or to revert something,
why not proof of burn to a new chain and have an 80% or 90% threshold, and all the money leaves and you go to a new chain? That way, 100% of the people agreed who are in the new chain. They actually destroyed their.
That's kind of what we did. I mean, we are now on a new chain.
No, you guys didn't do that. You just did basically a hard fork.
Yeah, that is creating a new chain. So
now you have the replay attack as a result. You know, it's a different situation. You did a poll to justify something you wanted to do, and that's okay. And the poll came out to be right for you guys, and you went and forked it, and now a resistance is forming. Who knows where it's going to go, but this is not healthy for the ecosystem. And another thing that concerns me is I was in Lviv in Ukraine with Vlad. I think it was last year, yeah, BIP, and he shows this roadmap, and there's like 5 hard forks you guys have in the roadmap. And so this is a simple, and Andreas is right, morally justified. Oh my God, if you could invent a better scenario for justifying forking the protocol, you can't get one. And it should be non-controversial, yet it is. And now you're walking into proof of stake and scalability improvements and improvements to the EVM and so forth. And there doesn't seem to me to be an appreciation for the process of this, or understanding that you're leaving some of your community behind every time you make a step and fork the protocol. It seems to be almost like trust us, we know what's best, we'll figure it out.
And I think that is currently exactly what makes the value of Ethereum. So we have this conservative system Bitcoin, and that's great, absolutely great. And we have this less conservative system Ethereum that is willing to make changes and that is willing to make change and go forward, even if this would mean you lose a small part of the community.
So just one second there, because in addition to what you just said, Martin, one of the propositions, as Charles pointed out, is that we have, at least in theory, we have the possibility of something like Rootstock implementing Ethereum-type virtual machines, but with the immutability and resistance to hard forks that you have seen demonstrated in the Bitcoin community. So in the end, this is simply a matter of finding the best fit for a chain that is strongly immutable versus a chain that is driven more rapidly, perhaps has a higher rate of innovation and change through a simple consensus mechanism and majority voting mechanism. It's not just Classic that offers that option, really.
Yeah, go ahead, Martin.
No, I mean, so again, if there is a separation that is kind of big enough on Ethereum, I'm totally in favor of what those guys in Rootstock are doing. So, of course.
So I mean, Rootstock is kind of a different world than Ethereum is. You're taking your money in Bitcoin, which lives in one trust model and social contract, and you're handing it over to a federated network. And that network is going to have the benefits of efficiency, and it's going to have a lot of other things like perhaps faster transaction times, et cetera, et cetera. There's beautiful things you can do once you enter federation land from decentralization land. And that's effectively a control layer, and that has a philosophy behind it. You can have it be anonymous, you can put a legal topology into it, you can do a lot of cool things once you enter a control layer overlay model, and you can have multiple versions corresponding to different social contracts and different use cases. But it's important to point out that the trust guarantees in the social contract of Bitcoin doesn't necessarily follow as you move into the overlay protocol. So I will disagree a little bit saying that Rootstock offers the same value proposition as Bitcoin. I think it offers a different value proposition, in some cases a superior one, but it is not exactly the same. If you want an immutable network, you're going to have to sit with Ethereum Classic and to a lesser extent with Ethereum.
Right, so I think the point you're making, Charles, and to explain to the less technical audience what you're saying, is the really special thing about any type of native asset within the primary layer of the consensus network is that every action on that native asset is validated through the consensus mechanism.
Right.
That's the Bitcoin transaction. If you make an overlay network through merged mining, as is, I believe, the current proposal for Rootstock, you're not validating the consensus layer of Bitcoin, which has the enormous investment in electricity and mining hardware, is not validating the EVM stack of the additional layer, at least not with its full power of the consensus mechanism. Ethereum is, Ethereum Classic is, so it's a slightly different approach.
Right, and in some cases it's a superior approach because you can put in a regulatory model like automated tax compliance and other things into that system, and then you can have consumer choice where they can decide which control layer they want to go to, and you can instantiate multiple versions. And that I think is kind of the government-friendly way of moving for some applications. So it's just important to point that out. Sorry.
I think what we've discovered is that no one on this panel is a maximalist of any kind. Everybody has the ability to coexist with multiple other chains. I'd like to go back to Anthony, who's playing the role of the pragmatist here. You're looking at this discussion involving potentially some options between a chain that is dominated by a majority consensus approach may move a bit faster, and a chain that is more conservative and more strongly immutable. How does that affect your decisions in what you develop for, and how do you look at what the market is telling you?
So what we decided to do, especially after the DAO situation, we realized we jumped the gun and started doing a lot of work on DAO integrations, and we've learned from that, and we're now going to continue on with our development paths is basically what we're going to do. The things that we've had, even before ETC came about, we have a certain path that we've lined up. We're going to keep looking to see what's going on. People are asking us, I've got Ether in my account. How do I get my ETC? And we're directing them to services and places where they can then remove it out of Jax and split it and bring them back into Jax if they want and keep their ETC somewhere else. That's how we're helping out our customers right now. We're letting them knowing that we're still just evaluating things, and we're going to we're going to allow ourselves to make our decisions, and we're going to then back up those decisions and carry things out. So we've got a short-term dev schedule. We're going to keep going out that, and then we'll see if this comes into play a little bit more, what we're going to decide to do. But we're not taking a hard stance on anything one way or the other.
All right, let's wrap things up and go into any final statements. I think we've gone for an hour and a half. Martin, why don't you?
I had a question. I had a question for you, but I'm not sure if we have time. Well,
sure, go ahead.
So, I get this argument you should not do a hard fork for things that run on top of the blockchain, and only if there's a protocol bug in the blockchain, like it was in Bitcoin. I mean, it was pretty obvious. You needed to do a hard fork at that point. So, but now let's assume we get something on top of Bitcoin, like in the Lightning Network. And let's assume now 10% of all Bitcoins are in there, or maybe 20, or maybe 50, or maybe 80%. So let's say 60% of all Bitcoins would be in Lightning Network contracts, and then it turns out there's a bug in those contracts. I think it's clearly, you have two options. You let the community die, or you fork, and you kind of rescue it. So, if you have a different opinion, please go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good point. And so the question is, would we go and put 15% of all of Bitcoin into the very first version of Lightning Network within 2 weeks of creating it with a fully complete contract? I think not.
That was a very bad decision. There's no question about it. So,
right, exactly. Well, at the very least, we can watch and learn from that decision. I think there is a certain value to the fact that the Bitcoin scripting language, through its simplicity, has a lower propensity to have unanticipated bugs. That's simply a fact. A stack-based, non-Turing complete language will exhibit fewer bugs than a full Turing complete language. Different use cases, of course. So I'm less worried about a specific implementation of Lightning Network where the consensus rules are executed for every Lightning Network transaction on all of the channel state. I'm less worried we're going to see a massive bug, but you're absolutely right. If 60% of the value of Bitcoin was in Lightning Network and we discovered a bug that destroyed that value, we would probably hard fork. And I think you'd see that happen. The same thing applies if there is if we find that ECDSA or SHA-256 or one of the other core cryptographic algorithms, and guess what would happen if we did fork? 20, 30, 40% of the network would refuse to do so, and we would have a Bitcoin Classic situation on our hands. It would be even stronger in the case of Bitcoin, and I think that's why it's been so difficult to arrive at a conclusion. All right, anyway, so that was my answer to your question, Martin. Let's do some final points. Charles.
My hope for my participation in the Ethereum Classic community is going to be basically trying to get them to coalesce around a social contract and get a reasonable roadmap put in place, attach some developers to it, and view it as an experiment. It's really a great opportunity, actually, for everybody in the space. We're getting an answer of what happens when you have a split of community and you have a chance to follow kind of two different paths and A/B test ideas. That to me, from an academic standpoint, is tremendously valuable, and I'm going to try to pursue that. Furthermore, my hope is that we can kind of tone down, moving forward, the vitriol and the anger between both communities. I mean, people got their money back. The DAO hacker was refunded on the Ethereum mainnet, and everybody got a bunch of free Ether Classic. And it's an opportunity for us to kind of view it like OpenOffice and LibreOffice, reset, and go about our own way and try to accomplish something productive for everybody. And I hope that's what ends up happening. Furthermore, it's a great data point for Bitcoin itself. At some point, Bitcoin is going to have to start making some hard decisions about its future and where it wants to go and what it wants to be. And it would be really nice if we can get some evidence from Ethereum Classic and Ethereum over a long arc of what are the consequences of having these types of splits, and it ultimately, I think, will give us more confidence moving forward when we have to make those hard decisions.
That's a great point, Charles. Anthony?
We're going to continue providing, I think, products that the masses can use. That's really what my focus on. Everything's for developers right now. Our focus is to provide the interface for blockchain, whether it be Ether, whether it be other ones, and it's also to provide more robustness in what we call relay services, or nodes, basically, that wallets use in order to push transactions, show balances, all those things. There's a lack of them out there, and we're coming up with strategies of how we can improve the infrastructure, and I think that involves collaboration. A lot of work, we're talking with the Mycelium guys, we're talking with the guys from Exodus, and we're seeing how we can each come together and start helping each other out and not do the same things that like add redundancy to services, and see how we can actually not we can work on different projects and then bring those together, that we can add strength to the different networks that we're going to be working on in the future. So I really call for more collaboration, really call for less toxicity, and just want to keep providing providing products and services that everybody's going to use and enjoy, and get this out to the masses.
Last but not least, Charles. Sorry,
Martin.
Martin. Sorry. Incorrect order, Martin.
Oh, do you want to go again? No. Yeah. So I'm honestly happy to see that most of the developers and the projects continue to build on ETH, because again, I think we haven't even started to get the positive network effects of having one. I mean, we haven't even one dApp that's really working on Ethereum, and it gets interesting if there are multiple dApps that interact with each other. And if we are at that stage, then in my opinion we could think about different chains running the Ethereum virtual machine and how they could work nicely together. So that would be my roadmap. However, if Ethereum Classic is there, of course they should I mean, they should do whatever they like. There's no question about that. But I would kind of suggest carefully, it would be, in my opinion, more valuable if they differentiate them further. So, for example, saying we will stick to proof of work, and that would otherwise I don't see too much value if two things are too close together, and then I would see the loss of network effect would be bigger than the value of having diversity.
Well, thank you all for participating. This has been a special edition of Let's Talk Bitcoin, LTB Live, specifically talking about Ethereum versus Ethereum Classic. the concepts of consensus and immutability. I'd like to thank our three special guests today, Charles Hoskinson, Anthony Iorio, Martin Köppelmann. Thank you so much for participating in this special edition of LTB. And
Thanks,
also
guys.
Our host, Stephanie Murphy.
And Andreas, thank you so much. You did a great job
And
bringing up
Adam,
all the discussion.
who unfortunately had some connectivity issues and wasn't able to moderate, but came in with some great questions, especially towards the end. That's
And
all
put
from
this
us
all
today.
together. Yeah.
Yes.
Thanks, everybody.
See you soon. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.